Hey everybody, welcome back to my coverage of the PogChamps 3 tournament. This is the final group match, Ludwig versus MoistCritical, and MoistCritical leads 1-0. If you missed the first game, you can check it in the info card up there and then come back and watch this video. So yes, Ludwig does need to win this game in order to take the match to a tiebreaker. He is the rating underdog by a tiny bit, but for the most part, these players are evenly matched, so let's see if he can do it. He does have the white pieces, so Ludwig starts off with e4. We have c5, a Sicilian defense by MoistCritical. We have c3 now from Ludwig, going for the very tricky c3 Sicilian or the Alapin Sicilian. And so, yeah, this is very tricky for black to play, especially if they don't know what they're doing. MoistCritical plays knight c6, and this is already not really the best response to the c3 Sicilian, because now it allows white to gain a really big center after d4, c cross d4, c cross d4, and now white has a really big center. So here is black. You need to contest the center with a move like e6, or even a move like e5 or d5. You cannot play the move that MoistCritical played, which is g6. This move just concedes the center to white too much, and white's going to have a very good game here. And Ludwig definitely takes advantage of this with the move d5 now, kicking away this knight once again. And the question is, where do you really put this knight? You can't move the knight to e5 because then there's f5 and the knight is trapped. The knight has absolutely no squares. You can't really move the knight to a5 either because first, well, you wouldn't want to blunder b4 as white. This looks like it's trapping the knight, but then there's bishop g7, and black actually wins the exchange here because white's rook is also trapped. Instead, first you would play queen d4, this hits the rook, and after knight f6, now you play b4, and the knight is trapped. So you can't move the knight to a5 either. What about knight to b4? Well, simply we can play a3 here as white, or even just a simple developing move like knight to c6. But a3 is fine as well, and then the knight comes back to a6, and white is just going to have a huge space advantage and a lead in development. You can play queen d4 here, you can play knight c3 here. It's just going to be a very pleasant game for white. So here the best move, or the move that the computer recommends even, is knight back to b8. But who's going to play that? So which one of these options will MoistCritical choose, and will Ludwig be able to punish him? Well, he goes for knight to e5, and now let's see if Ludwig finds this f4 move. He does, and he does play f4. Ludwig playing f4, and now this knight is trapped. MoistCritical realizes that this knight is a goner, and so he just gives it up with the move bishop g7. He figures, I'll win this pawn for it, and I'll get back into the game and try to keep developing. Ludwig definitely takes this knight with f takes e5. We have bishop takes e5, and Ludwig continues developing with tempo with knight to f3. So Ludwig is now up a piece. Let's see if he can convert this. It still is very early in the game, though, so lots of chances for blunders from both sides. We have bishop back to g7, and Ludwig continues developing with knight to c3. We have d6 now and bishop b5 check. This will force MoistCritical to either block with the bishop or move the king and concede castling rights. And if MoistCritical blocks with the bishop, Ludwig is totally okay with those trades because he is up a piece. So MoistCritical decides he wants to keep castling rights, so he plays bishop d7, and we have bishop takes d7. Ludwig going for those trades, he's totally okay with that. And now Ludwig going for even more trades, he plays the move queen a4, now pinning this queen to black's king, so the queen will definitely come off. However, this is a huge blunder because black here can actually remove the only defender of the queen, and this happens with check. So here black can play bishop takes c3 check, and after white recaptures, black can win the queen for free. So MoistCritical had a huge opportunity to get back in the game. MoistCritical would be up a queen for a bishop here, and yeah, this would definitely be very good. So will MoistCritical see this tactic or not? Let's see. After queen a4, we do not have bishop takes c3. Instead, MoistCritical sees that, okay, white is threatening to make me not castle, so let's take there first because the trade is going to happen anyway. This way I can at least still castle. But yes, MoistCritical did have that missed win there. And after knight takes a4, Ludwig is still up a piece, so let's see how the game continues. We have knight f6 just continuing development, and knight back to c3, getting that knight back into the game and defending this pawn. We have castles and castles, knight d7, opening up this bishop once again, and rook to e1. We have rook a to c8, MoistCritical getting his rook on that open file, definitely a good move, and now knight to b5. Developing this bishop is also an option, but here anything wins. When you move this knight too, this b pawn is pressured, so maybe bishop d2 here it would have been a better move, or even something like bishop g5 inducing f6 to block this bishop. But we have knight to b5 and a6 from MoistCritrical. We have knight b to d4, saving that knight, and knight to e5. This does allow Ludwig to go for another trade, which he definitely does. He wants to be going for those trades. Knight takes e5, d takes e5, and knight to f3. This knight to e4, or excuse me, knight to e5 move by MoistCritrical was not very good, because not only did it allow a trade, but now your bishop is also blocked off. So not the best move from MoistCritrical there, but stuff happens. We have rook to c2 for MoistCritrical. Now, looking to get that rook into the game, he can potentially double up, and this rook will be very active on this second rank here. So, definitely a good move there. We have b3 now from Ludwig, just looking to get his bishop developed, and e6 from MoistCritrical. And here you can take, or you can push d6, so which one will MoistCritrical do? He does go for d6, which I think I like better than taking, so good job of him. It creates a passed pawn, and this pawn is very close to promoting, so definitely a good move there. We have rook to d8 now, MoistCritrical looking to stop that passed pawn, and rook to d1, Ludwig supports it. We have rook to e2 going after this e pawn from behind now, and bishop g5, gaining a tempo on this rook and getting Ludwig getting his last piece into the game. However, this does allow MoistCritrical to block this with f6, gain a tempo on the bishop, and then pick up this e pawn. So will MoistCritrical do that? Yes, he does. We have f6, bishop h4, and rook takes e4. Though, to be fair, it was a little hard to defend this e pawn as white anyway, so maybe it was better that it was given up anyway. They also have this very strong passed pawn, which Ludwig continues to push with d7. We have g5 now, and instead of moving this bishop, to g3 or f2 or even e1, Ludwig plays a fancy move. He plays rook a to c1, which is a very good move, getting your rook on this open file and threatening rook to c8. So now the idea is if black plays g takes h4, there's rook to c8, and this pawn will promote, or you'll have to sacrifice the rook for the pawn. So definitely a very sneaky move here from Ludwig. Will MoistCritrical take the bishop? He does not go for the bishop. He instead plays king f7, but here you should still play rook to c8. Rook to c8 as Ludwig, and obviously you cannot take this because the pawn will promote, so you have to defend your rook with king to e7. But now after a move like bishop to f2, this bishop will come to c5 next and remove the defense of the king from the rook. So even if you go for this pawn with rook takes d7, there's still bishop c5, and the king will have to move. You'll lose the rook. So this was one winning continuation Ludwig could have gone for. But after king to f7, Ludwig plays a different winning continuation, which is arguably just as fancy, which is bishop takes g5. And here as black, you shouldn't actually take this, because if you take this, then you'll get forked on your king and your rook. More pieces are coming off, and it's just not good for you overall. So here you should probably just continue with king to e7. Here is black, but MoistCritrical does take this bishop. It's very tempting to take the two pieces for the rook, even though you still lose here as MoistCritrical. So MoistCritrical goes for this. We have knight takes g5, getting that fork in, and king to e7, knight takes e4. And here, I mean, you can take this pawn as MoistCritrical, but then you're down a rook and you only have one piece left, so it's kind of hard. This is already really losing for MoistCritrical. It's going to take a miracle for him to come back into this game. We have bishop h6 now attacking that rook on c1, but Ludwig sees it and moves it to c8. And now you have to take this pawn. There's simply no more waiting that can be done. We have rook takes d7, and we trade one pair of rooks. Rook takes d7 and king takes d7. And let's see how Ludwig converts this. We have rook h8 now and bishop e3 check, king to f1 and king to c6. Rook takes h7, mopping up black's last pawns, and king to d5. Knight to c3, saving the knight, and king to d4. Knight e2, saving the knight once again, and king to d3. Now rook takes b7, capturing more of black's pawns, and e4. We have rook e7 and now bishop d2. Rook takes e6 and e3. And I mean, here you can even sacrifice this rook for the pawn, but there's no point in making things any harder for yourself. Ludwig just goes rook d6 check, and after king c2, you would not want to take this bishop because, actually, I think maybe you can, but it's just not worth making things complicated. Ludwig just plays h4, and he's looking to promote this pawn. This pawn is blocked by the knight. It's not going anywhere, so you're going to be totally fine here as white. We have king b2 and now h5. Ludwig continue pushing that pawn. King takes a2 and h6. King takes b3 and now h7. White will make a new queen. We have a5 and h8 equals queen. a4 and rook b6 check. King c2, queen c8 check. And black is not going to have enough time to promote a pawn. We have king d1 now and rook b1 check, bishop c1, and here white had mate in 1 with queen takes c1 checkmate. But instead we have queen d8 check, and after king c2, queen b8. This gives black one more chance to push their pawn, so you just got to make sure you don't mess things up too much here as white. But after a3 and queen b3 check, king d2 and queen c3 check, king d1, now Ludwig finds this queen takes c1 idea, and he does play queen takes c1, which is checkmate. So we will have our third Armageddon match of the tournament, Ludwig versus MoistCritrical. This has been a very anticipated matchup, so we'll see who wins in the Armageddon game. We are tied 1-1, and yeah, Ludwig actually played extremely well this game, so he found a lot of tactics, didn't make any mistakes except that one queen hang at the beginning. Luckily for him, MoistCritical did not see it, so we'll just have to see how the third game pans out. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say about this game or this match. So check out my PogChamps 3 playlist up there, and check out the Armageddon game on the left side of the screen. Be sure to check it out. And thank you guys. I love you. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.